I was called a homewrecker at my husband's funeral until his shocking will exposed the truth no one expected. The sky is low and gray, like it's grieving with me. I stand beneath a canopy of wilting black umbrellas, rainwater trickling down my collar. The wind carries the scent of damp earth and roses, too sweet, too heavy. His coffin is being lowered into the ground, just a few feet away, but my eyes are fixed on the people around me. They're not crying, not really. They're watching me. I'm Claire. I'm 52 years old. I live in a small coastal town in Oregon, a place where everyone thinks they know everything about everyone. But nobody really knew my husband. Not the way I did. They think I don't belong here. I can see it in the tight mouths, the averted eyes, the way people shuffle just slightly away from me, as if grief is contagious. They whisper behind gloved hands. A woman in a navy coat shakes her head at me with a scowl. I recognize her. It's his eldest daughter. She's flanked by her brothers, who don't even glance in my direction. I've never felt so unwanted in a place I had every right to be. The priest speaks of legacy and memory, but his words are muffled. I'm focused on the way his son Patrick keeps glancing at me, like I'm the one who killed him, like I don't deserve to be here mourning him. And then I hear it, a sharp whisper loud enough to slice through the drizzle. Homewrecker. It hits me in the chest, harder than the grief. A murmur rises. Someone else mutters something I can't quite make out, but it doesn't matter. The message is clear. In their eyes, I'm not the grieving wife. I'm the other woman, the intruder, the enemy. My knees wobble. I clutch the folded program in my hand, tighter, trying to anchor myself in the storm of eyes and judgment. My lips part to speak, but no words come. What could I possibly say? That we were married, that he loved me, that I was there for him in the nights when he coughed and gasped for breath and begged me not to tell anyone how sick he was. I glance around hoping for even one kind face. I find none. He wanted a small funeral, just family, but what he failed to account for was how much his family hated me. I was never allowed to truly be a part of them. They tolerated me at best, ignored me at worst, and now in death, they're letting loose everything they never said aloud. No one offers me a ride to the reception. No one walks with me to the car. I sit behind the wheel rein, beating against the windshield, like fingers tapping out a message I can't decipher. I stare at the steering wheel, clutching it with white-knuckled hands, and finally let the tears fall. How did it come to this? 2 years ago, I thought I was building a life with a man who finally saw me for who I was not, what I had not, what I could do, but who I was at my core. We were both older, wiser, gentler. Our love was quiet, no fireworks, just the steady burn of something real. But real doesn't matter to the outside world. To them, the only truth is the version they believe. And the version they believe is that I ruined everything. I don't know if I can make it through this. But I know one thing. If he were here, if he could see what they were doing to me, he would stand beside me. Because he knew the truth. And so do I. Still, as I pull away from the cemetery, the final shovelful of dirt thudding against the lid of his casket, a sick feeling curls in my stomach. If his children believe I'm a liar, if they think I tricked him, manipulated him, stole him, then what will they do next? I didn't come to the funeral to fight. I came to say goodbye. But somehow, this feels like just the beginning of something darker. If you were in my shoes, what would you do? I didn't expect them to be kind. But I didn't expect to be humiliated either. The funeral should have been the worst part of the day. But it wasn't. The worst part came after when the service ended and the crowd filtered toward their cars. Not one of them looked at me. Not one handshake, no condolences, just whispers in the wind. Can't believe she showed up. She's the reason he died alone. I heard every word, maybe not with my ears, but with every inch of my body. The air around me turned heavy, dense with judgment. I caught Patrick's eye. Just once he looked through me, like I was nothing, and his sister Sharon wouldn't even look at all. She brushed past me so hard our coats touched, but her face remained tilted skyward expression, stiff, like I was unworthy of acknowledgement. I stood alone near the rows of granite markers, watching the others drift back to their cars in silent, disapproving clusters. A few glanced over their shoulders at me, just enough to be sure I saw it. That satisfied little gleam in their eye that said, "Yes, we're ignoring you, because you deserve it." I clutched my purse to my chest, like it could shield me. Inside, it was my only weapon, though I didn't know it at the time, a small folded copy of our marriage license. We had gotten married in private. No ceremony, no rings, just a quiet signing at the courthouse on a rainy Thursday. He said it was to protect me, that his children would make my life miserable if they knew, that he wanted to live the time he had left in peace. And I trusted him. I loved him. He was gentle, funny, and so tired of fighting with them. He told me, "Let's just keep this between us for now. We'll tell them when the time is right." But now he was gone, and the truth we protected together was turning into a weapon they would use against me. The reception was held at the family estate. His house, the house he'd told me, would someday be ours. I had keys. I had lived there off and on during his illness. Cooked meals in that kitchen, slept in that bed. Read books aloud to him while he tried to pretend he wasn't fading. But when I arrived that afternoon, wet from the rain and shaken to my bones, the locks had been changed. I stood on the porch with the world spinning and a trash bag at my feet. It was half split at the bottom, clothes tumbling out one of my blouses, soaked with rain. I recognized the handwriting on the attached note. Sharon's. "You're not welcome here. Don't make this harder than it has to be." I didn't even knock. I didn't want to give them the satisfaction. I just turned around, walked back to my car, and sat there with the engine off, breathing, shaking. I had never felt shame like that before, not even during the ugly days of my divorce 10 years ago, not even when I lost my job and had to start over in my 40s. This was deeper, personal. This wasn't about what I'd done. It was about who I was in their eyes, a parasite, a gold digger, a woman who latched onto a dying man for comfort and cash. They didn't know how he'd wept in my arms the night he found out the cancer had returned. They didn't see how he clung to me like a raft in the storm of his last year. They didn't read the sticky notes he left for me all over the house on the fridge, the mirror, my books, saying, "Love you, and thank you for staying." But they believed what they wanted to, and that made it true for them. I went back to my little apartment near the beach, the one bedroom with the creaky floorboards and peeling wallpaper that I never complained about. He said we'd move out one day, that the house would be mine eventually. Now all I had was silence. I brewed tea and tried to calm my hands, but they wouldn't stop trembling. My phone buzzed on the counter, a text from an unknown number. "If you have any dignity left, don't show your face again." I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just sat there, hands wrapped around my mug, wondering how much worse it could get. What do you do when you're the villain in everyone else's story? What do you do when love turns into scandal? That night, I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, his voice echoing in my mind. They'll understand one day. When I'm gone, everything will make sense. But it didn't. Not yet. And I feared that maybe it never would. I met Thomas in the most ordinary way. No candlelight, no grand gestures, just two tired people in the same grocery aisle, reaching for the same brand of canned soup. He smiled first, apologizing with that gentle voice of his, and I laughed something I hadn't done easily in years. We struck up a conversation by the dairy case, talked about how hard it was to cook for one. He mentioned being a widower. I shared that I was divorced. Our stories didn't feel like small talk, they felt like recognition. He was 58 then, and I had just turned 46. I remember thinking how strange it was that something as simple as a conversation could crack open a door in your heart that had been sealed shut for so long. Over the weeks that followed, I saw him more often, a coincidence at first, then a pattern. We'd bump into each other at the Saturday farmers market, at the library, even at the beach. Always brief encounters, always kind, until one day he asked if I wanted to grab a coffee. We sat in a cafe near the water, the sun filtering through the windows in thick, golden streaks. He told me about his wife, Margaret, and how she died 5 years earlier from breast cancer. He spoke of her with tenderness, not grief. She was my best friend, he said. But you don't stop living just because someone else's story ended. That stayed with me. Maybe because I'd spent so long convincing myself that my own story had already played out, that what I'd had a 20-year marriage that ended in betrayal was all there would ever be. But Thomas made me feel seen again, like there was more ahead than just memories. We started seeing each other regularly. Simple things, walks, lunches, talking on the phone until midnight about music and books and the absurdity of getting older. We never rushed anything. There was a softness to it, a rhythm I hadn't felt in decades. He didn't try to fix me. He didn't treat me like I was broken. He just listened, and little by little, I began to trust him with the pieces of myself I'd buried deep. The first time he held my hand was on a foggy afternoon by the pier. I remember the rough texture of his palm, the way he squeezed, just slightly, like he was making a promise he hadn't yet spoken, out loud. I asked him what he was thinking. I'm thinking I'd like to see you every day for the rest of my life. He didn't say it with urgency. He said it like a prayer. But we both had baggage, and his came with names, Sharon, Patrick, and Daniel, his children. He warned me early on. They're protective, he said. They never approved of anyone I dated after their mother. And they're not particularly kind. I told him I wasn't looking for a fight, that I would be respectful, patient. I'd go slow, so I did. I tiptoed around them, around holidays, around birthdays. I sent cards they never acknowledged, invited them to brunches they declined, bought gifts that were left unopened. It was like knocking on a door that had been boarded shut. And Thomas, he tried, but he hated conflict. He was so tired of arguing. It's just easier this way, he'd say. They'll come around eventually. He believed that. I'm not sure I ever did. Still, we made our own life, quiet but full. Every Sunday, he made pancakes and played jazz, while I read the newspaper out loud, in funny voices, just to make him laugh. We gardened, watched old movies, cared for a neighbor's dog. I think in some ways, we healed each other. We talked about marriage, but cautiously. We both knew what the backlash would be. When his health started to decline again, just subtle things at first, like fatigue and shortness of breath, I begged him to go to the doctor. He resisted. It's just age, he said. It wasn't. It was the cancer, back with a vengeance. This time in his lungs. After the diagnosis, he changed. He became quieter, but more determined. One morning, he looked at me across the breakfast table and said, I don't want to die with you as my girlfriend. I want you to be my wife. We married quietly at the courthouse the next week. It was raining again. He wore a navy suit that hung a little looser than it used to. I wore a simple gray dress and carried a bouquet of daisies. No family, no friends. Just 2 signatures, 1 kiss, and a promise sealed in the middle of a storm. We took a photo outside, under his umbrella. That's the picture I now keep in my wallet, the one I nearly showed at the funeral, before I thought better of it. He told me we'd wait to tell the kids. "Let's just get through this next scan," he said. "If it's good, we'll sit them down together. If it's not, we'll figure it out." But there was no time. The next scan was worse, and before we could tell anyone, he was gone. Now they think I was a shadow in his life, but I was the one he kissed goodnight, the one he held on to when the morphine wore off, the one who fed him soup and washed his hair and held his hand as he cried. I didn't steal their father. I loved him. If you were me, would you have done it any differently? The first time I met Sharon, she didn't even shake my hand. Thomas had invited her to lunch at a quiet little restaurant off the highway, and he asked me to come. "Just be yourself," he said. "She'll come around." But she didn't. Not that day, and not any day after. She arrived 20 minutes late, sunglasses still on, and slid into the booth without acknowledging me. Thomas did all the talking. He tried to guide the conversation gently, stories about her children, her new job. I smiled, nodded, tried to show interest, but she wouldn't look at me, wouldn't speak to me directly. Just sat there cutting into her salad, like the fork was a weapon. That lunch ended with her walking out before dessert. She told Thomas, "Not me, I'm not doing this," and left him sitting there, face pale and silent. He didn't speak much on the way home. He held my hand, though. That meant more than anything. The sons weren't much better. Patrick, the middle one, had inherited all of Thomas's sharp features, but none of his warmth. When Thomas introduced us at a farmer's market a few weeks after that lunch, Patrick gave me one look and said, "So you're the new woman. Not Claire, not my dad's girlfriend, just the new woman." I laughed it off then, but it stung. It always did. Daniel, the youngest, was the quietest of the 3, and coldest. He barely spoke to his father, unless money was involved. When Thomas mentioned me to him over the phone, once I overheard Daniel's flat response, "Just don't let her mess things up again." Again? What again? I hadn't even been given a chance. Over time, I stopped trying to win them over. Not because I didn't care, but because Thomas was hurting. Every time he reached out, they pulled back. Every photo he sent them of us went ignored. Every invitation to dinner was declined. Every voicemail ended in silence. He tried to hide how much it hurt, but I saw it. I saw it in the way he'd stare at his phone after sending them messages, pretending not to wait for a reply. I saw it when he deleted the family calendar from the kitchen wall after they didn't show up for Thanksgiving. Again, I saw it in the way he'd light up at any scrap of contact, a short email, a forwarded meme, and then dim again when that was all he got. There was one moment, about a year before he died, that I'll never forget. He was sitting in the garden, trimming the rose bushes, and I brought him lemonade. He took it with a weak smile and said, "You know, sometimes I wonder if they ever really knew me." I asked him what he meant. He looked up at the sky, the clouds, thick and unmoving, and said, "They know the Father they built up in their heads, not the man I became." He never stopped loving them, but I think he finally stopped chasing them. He poured everything into our quiet little life instead. Our daily walks, our crossword puzzles, the lake house he bought in secret. He wanted peace. He just wanted to be happy. But I think some part of him always hoped that they would come back, that they would see me the way he did. They never did. When he got sick, I offered to call them. He begged me not to. "Not yet," he said. "They'll just make it harder." And when the cancer took over, when the coughing fits left him breathless, when he couldn't walk without help, when he clutched my hand and whispered, Don't leave me. They weren't there. I was. I held the bucket. I changed the sheets. I called the hospice nurse at 2 a.m. when his fever spiked, and he was hallucinating, thinking he was 20 years younger and still working at the paper plant. I was there for every moment of pain and every moment of clarity. When he slipped away, his head resting against my shoulder, my name was the last thing he said. Not Sharon, not Patrick, not Daniel. Me. And now they call me the home wrecker. They say I stole him, but I didn't steal anything. I loved a man they had already walked away from, and I stayed. I stayed when it hurt, when it was lonely, when it would have been easier to walk away. Why does love make you the villain in someone else's story? If you were the one who stayed, does it even matter, Thomas didn't like confrontation. He told me that early on, said that after decades of managing arguments, disappointments, and emotional landmines with his children, he'd grown tired of being the peacekeeper in a war that never ended. They loved their mother more in death than they ever did in life. He once said, quietly, the weight of it settling into the lines around his mouth. And they've rewritten history in her favor. There's no room in their version of the past for me to move on. So we made an unspoken decision to protect what we had by keeping it private. It wasn't secrecy rooted in shame. It was defense. A quiet defense of something beautiful we were afraid the world would taint. He started calling them our meetings. Every Tuesday at noon, Thomas would come to my apartment after his volunteer shift at the library. I'd make sandwiches, and we'd sit on the back patio where the sea breeze came in, stirring the curtains like whispers. He'd bring old books or silly trinkets he found at yard sales. Sometimes he'd just bring himself tired and aching, but always happy to see me. One afternoon, while we sipped iced tea and listened to the gulls crying above, he said, "This is the best part of my week, Claire. You're the only person who doesn't want something from me." That broke my heart a little. He was worn down by the expectation of being a father, a provider, an apologizer. His life had become an endless performance of regret, one he didn't even believe in anymore. But with me, he could just be. We went on road trips, sometimes short ones, so he wouldn't get too tired. Crater Lake, the Columbia Gorge, a fishing dock in Newport, where he once fell in fully clothed, trying to untangle a stubborn line. We laughed until we cried soaked and freezing, driving home with the heat on full blast, and his shoes squelching with every step. He bought me a small ring during one of those trips. It wasn't a diamond, just a polished piece of sea glass set in a silver band. "This isn't a proposal," he said, with a sly grin. "It's a prelude." I wore it every day after that. Never called it an engagement ring, but I think in our hearts we both knew what it meant. Still, we stayed quiet. He never told his children, and I never pushed. But I did ask him once over breakfast, as we sat at the corner booth of a diner we loved, "Do you think they'll ever accept us?" He looked down at his eggs for a long time before saying, "No, but maybe someday they'll understand." He started writing more around that time, scribbling into a thick, leather-bound journal that he never let out of his sight. "Just memories," he said, "in case I don't get the chance to say them out loud." He filled it with pieces of his life, pieces of our life, stories, letters, thoughts, wishes. I didn't read it then. I respected his privacy. Now I wonder if maybe I should have read it while he was alive, just to tell him how beautiful it was, that he was still trying to explain himself to a world that refused to listen. Our wedding was the most private meeting of all. It wasn't even planned. One day, after a doctor's appointment that left us both hollow and shaken, he looked at me across the car's center console and said, "Let's not waste time." We drove straight to the courthouse, hand in hand, silent. I kept waiting for him to change his mind. He didn't. The clerk smiled kindly when she saw us, like she could see the fragility beneath our smiles. When she asked if we had witnesses, Thomas turned to a young woman in the waiting room and asked if she'd mind. She said yes. I never even caught her name. We said our vows quietly. My hands trembled. His voice cracked. Afterward, we sat on a park bench nearby, sharing a sandwich we picked up from a food truck. He unwrapped it slowly and said, "I feel lighter." So did I. But that lightness didn't last. He grew weaker, fast. The cancer moved quicker than any of us expected. There were weeks where he didn't leave his bed, where I did everything, bathed him, fed him, read to him, held him, when the pain became unbearable. He kept the marriage a secret through it all. Even in his final weeks, he didn't tell them. "I want peace," he whispered once, "even if it's only for a little while." So I gave it to him, even though it meant I would inherit the aftermath, even though it meant the world would never see the love we built, only the lie they believed. But now with him gone and their knives drawn, I realize something. There's no protecting the truth when people are committed to hating you. There's only surviving it, and I intend to survive. If someone you loved asked you to live in the shadows, would you do it? The sky had cleared by the time I reached the family home, but the clouds inside me hadn't budged. It was supposed to be familiar ground, where I'd spent countless evenings helping Thomas with his medications, cooking his favorite lentil soup curling up beside him, while he slept in that recliner with a book still open on his lap. But when I pulled into the driveway that day, something was different. Off. The windows were dark, the porch lights off, and the stillness made my stomach churn. I had come back expecting a painful welcome, maybe a few stiff nods, maybe avoidance, but I never expected to be shut out entirely. I parked at the curb and stepped out, gravel crunching beneath my shoes. That's when I saw it. My suitcase, my tote bag, a half-open trash bag with a few of my folded clothes sticking out the side, sitting right there on the porch, and next to them, a yellow envelope flattened by the wind. No one answered when I knocked. The house might as well have been abandoned, but I could see them shadows moving behind the curtains. I saw Sharon's silhouette. I knocked again, firmer. She didn't come to the door. Instead, I heard the click of a lock from the other side, like punctuation on a sentence I hadn't finished reading. I bent down and picked up the envelope. Inside was a handwritten note. The pen had pressed hard enough to dent the paper. "Claire, you were never part of this family. Please don't embarrass yourself further. You're not welcome here. Sharon." No greeting. No "I'm sorry for your loss." Just a dismissal. A cold, calculated sentence to exile. I stood there for a long time, my fingers tightening around the paper until it crumpled. Then I looked up straight into the Ring doorbell. I knew they were watching. I could feel it. I wanted to scream, to say he was my husband, to throw open my purse and show them the marriage certificate, the photos, the journal entries. But I didn't. Not yet. Instead, I gathered my things shaking as I stuffed my clothes back into the suitcase. A pair of my shoes had been tossed in upside down. A small framed picture of Thomas and me, taken at the lake, had its glass shattered. It didn't even feel like anger. It felt like erasure. I didn't cry on the drive home. I kept expecting to, but the tears refused to come. I sat in my car in the parking lot of my apartment complex, the soft sound of the radio barely breaking through the static in my head. The world was going on ordinary and unaware. Inside, I emptied the trash bag on my bed. Wrinkled blouses, a bottle of my shampoo, my slippers. Things I'd left at Thomas's for comfort. Little signs of life. now returned like evidence, and then almost missed at the bottom his handkerchief. The blue one, with the stitched T that I used to tuck into his chest pocket before doctor's appointments, because it made him feel put together, he said. I held it to my chest and sank to the floor. The grief came then, quietly, a deep, bone-heavy ache that rolled through me in waves. It wasn't just about losing Thomas. It was about being cast out of everything we built. No one gets to mourn in a vacuum. You need space, softness, recognition of what was shared. And instead, I was treated like a mistake he made too late in life to correct. I lay there for hours, unable to move. Later that night, the phone rang. I didn't recognize the number, but I answered anyway. Claire. It was his lawyer, Mr. Dolan. Kind man, elderly, measured. I'd like to schedule the reading of Thomas's will, he said gently. There's something in it that may surprise you. I paused. His children. Yes, they'll be there. And then, after a moment's hesitation, he added, You may want to bring documentation. Documentation. I knew exactly what he meant. My marriage certificate, our joint bank account statements. The letters Thomas wrote, the deed he'd signed just 2 months before he died. He knew what I knew, that the children had decided I didn't count, and that Thomas, in his quiet, deliberate way, may have left something behind that would say otherwise. I looked around the room at the messy pile of my belongings, the half-unpacked suitcase, the faint smell of Thomas's cologne still lingering in one of the shirts I'd folded. I had been pushed out, locked out, but I wasn't done. They thought they could silence me with a trash bag and a cruel note. They forgot that I had his voice, written in pen, stored in pages only I had ever seen. They forgot I had proof. And now so did I. Would you walk into that room, alone, knowing they hate you, just to defend a love they refused to believe was ever real? That night, I didn't sleep. I sat at the kitchen table, the soft hum of the fridge, the only sound, breaking the silence, flipping through the worn leather journal Thomas had guarded so closely in his final months. It was heavy. Not just in weight, but in truth, his truth. I hadn't read it before, not out of disinterest, but out of respect. It was his private place, where he poured the thoughts he wasn't ready to say aloud. But now I needed his words like a lifeline. The first few entries were simple enough. Observations about his health, jottings about the garden, descriptions of our days together, like tiny snapshots. Claire made lentil soup again today. I don't know what she puts in it, but it tastes like comfort. I smiled through my tears at that. But the further I read, the deeper it cut. They don't ask about me anymore. They ask about the house, about the money. Not once has Patrick asked how I'm feeling. Sharon sent me an email with links to grief counselors 6 years too late. I told Claire we'd wait. I was wrong. The waiting made it worse. They'll never see her, not because she's not worthy, but because they don't want to see her. I married her today. I didn't tell them. I wanted to, but I'm tired of being made to feel ashamed for loving again. If they shut her out when I'm gone, then I have failed. Every page a confession, a testament, not just to what he felt, but to how afraid he'd been. Not of death, but of the cruelty that would be left behind in its wake. In the back pocket of the journal, tucked in neatly, was an envelope with my name written in his sharp, slanted handwriting. Inside a letter, Claire, if you're reading this, it means the time has come. I'm sorry I wasn't brave enough to shout our love from the rooftops, but I tried to protect it the only way I knew how, by giving it peace. You were my last great love, my peace, my home. I've made arrangements. The lawyer will explain everything. You'll find the paperwork in the brown folder in the hall closet. Don't let them erase you. Don't let them turn my silence into your exile. You are my wife, and you always will be. Thomas. I pressed the paper to my chest, tears slipping silently down my cheeks. For a moment, I didn't feel angry anymore. I didn't feel scared. I just missed him. In the hallway closet, just as he said, behind an old box of Christmas ornaments and a stack of yellowed newspapers, I found the folder. Inside was everything: a copy of the marriage license, the deed to the lake house in both our names, updates to his life insurance policy, and one more thing, a notarized copy of his revised will. The name at the top: Claire Evelyn Masters, spouse, primary beneficiary. I stared at it, not out of greed, but disbelief that he had done this, that he had seen what might come and tried to make it right. But I also knew what it meant. This wasn't just a line in a document. This was a spark, a match to the powder keg his children were already standing on. I closed the folder and set it beside the journal. My hands trembled as I smoothed the letter flat on the table. He had left me everything I needed, but not the one thing I wanted most: him. The next morning, I dressed carefully. Not in black, not again. I wore the same navy blouse I wore the day we walked along the shore, and he picked up that silly piece of driftwood shaped like a heart. Something steady. Something that made me feel like me. The lawyer's office was downtown, in a brick building with ivy climbing the side like fingers trying to pull the walls apart. I arrived early, the folder clutched tight under my arm. Inside, the receptionist offered me tea. I declined. When I stepped into the conference room, they were already there. Sharon, Patrick, Daniel. Their faces were masks, tight-lipped, stone-eyed, resentful. Sharon's jaw clenched when she saw me. "What is she doing here?" she spat, before anyone could speak. Mr. Dolan, ever calm, gestured to a seat. "Because she has every right to be." I didn't sit. I opened the folder and laid it flat on the polished wood table. I was his wife. I said, my voice low but clear. We were married. He left me this. Their faces shifted. Confusion first, then disbelief, then fury. Daniel shot to his feet. "This is fake. This is a scam. My father wouldn't." He would, I said, cutting him off. And he did. Sharon stood up too. "You manipulated him. You waited until he was sick and vulnerable, and then you trapped him. He was confused. He was—" Mr. Dolan cleared his throat sharply. "Your father was many things, but confused, no. He came to this office fully of sound mind, signed every page himself. The paperwork is in order. It's done." Silence. Only the sound of Patrick's pen clicking over and over, his hand shaking slightly. I sat down then, not because I was tired, but because I wasn't going anywhere. Let them rage. Let them deny. Let them tear at the air with their misplaced grief. The truth was in the room now, and it had my name on it. If the person you loved left you a final truth, would you be brave enough to carry it, even if the world turned its back? You could have heard a pin drop after Mr. Dolan laid the certified marriage certificate on the table. His tone was calm, but his words had the finality of a judge's gavel. "This document makes it clear," he said. "Claire was not a visitor in Thomas's life. She was his legal spouse." Sharon looked like she had been slapped. Her lips parted slightly, her eyes wide, but no words came out. Patrick leaned forward, eyes narrowing, like he could will the paper to change under his glare. Daniel crossed his arms and sank lower in his chair, shaking his head with slow, exaggerated disbelief. It would have been almost funny if it hadn't hurt so much. Sharon finally found her voice. "This is impossible. He would have told us." Would he? I wanted to say. Would he have told you, the same daughter who refused to even let him say my name in her home, who stormed out of the hospital when she saw me sitting beside his bed? But I didn't say it. I didn't need to, because Thomas already had. He didn't tell you because he didn't trust you with it, I said quietly. Because he knew you'd treat our marriage like an attack, like a betrayal, and he wanted peace in the end. Mr. Dolan nodded. Thomas came in alone, asked me to update everything, will property bank accounts. He made no excuses for his choices. He flipped through the folder, slowly, methodically. The lake house is fully deeded to Claire. The life insurance policy is split. Claire receives the primary share, and the remainder is divided among the children. His personal accounts and possessions go to Claire. Sharon scoffed. Unbelievable. So she gets everything. No, I said softly. I get him. You get your anger. I didn't steal anything. He gave me what was his to give. Patrick stood up pacing now. You moved into his life like a snake in the grass. We didn't even know you were serious. Because you didn't want to know I snapped, and something in me broke loose. You didn't call. You didn't visit. He sat in that house dying, while you sent half-hearted texts and dodged his calls. And when he did reach out, you were too busy judging him to listen. Daniel pointed at me, voice rising. You think you're better than us. You think you knew him more than his own children. I didn't back down. No, I loved him, and I stayed. That's the difference. There it was. The thing none of them could argue. They had his name, his DNA. But I had his time, his trust, his fears, his last breath. I had the nights he woke up shaking, afraid to sleep, because the pain was so deep, he thought he wouldn't wake again. I had the way he reached for my hand in the quiet moments when he thought no one was watching. I had the journal entries where he poured out his regrets, not about marrying me, but about spending so much of his life afraid of the people in that very room. They didn't speak after that. Sharon stared down at the will face, pale. Daniel crossed his arms tighter. Patrick tapped his foot relentlessly, a staccato of frustration and wounded pride. Mr. Dolan closed the folder. This meeting is concluded. Further disputes can be taken up with the court, but I assure you, they won't get far. The children left together without a single glance my way. Not one word, not one question, not even curiosity. And that I realized was the final proof, not just of how they viewed me, but of how little they had truly known their father. They weren't even interested in the truth, just in what had been taken from them. I stayed in the room. After they left, the silence thick, Mr. Dolan gently collecting the papers. He looked at me, then, with something softer than sympathy. Respect. He spoke highly of you, he said. He wanted you to have a future that wasn't defined by grief. My voice cracked. It still hurts. Of course, he said. That's what love does. That evening, I went home and laid everything out on the kitchen table. Again, the journal, the will, the letter, the photo of us on our wedding day. I didn't feel triumphant. This wasn't a victory. It was vindication, a quiet knowing that I had belonged in his life, even if the rest of the world wanted to pretend otherwise. I was never the mistress. I was his wife, and I didn't need them to believe it. I had the truth, and the truth was enough. If your love was real, but no one believed it would, it'd still be enough for you. There's a strange silence that follows. After you win a war, no one believed you were even fighting. In the days after the will reading, my phone didn't ring. No knocks on the door, no apology messages. Just silence cold, final and deliberate. From them, that is. But the storm had shifted. I wasn't the one being hunted anymore. I was the one holding the torch, now lighting the path they never wanted to see. And the truth scorched every lie they'd clung to like armor. The will was detailed, meticulous, so much so. It made me wonder just how long Thomas had known what he was doing. It wasn't hastily drawn up in the shadow of sickness. It had been in place for months. He had planned, prepared, protected me. His estate wasn't massive, but it was meaningful. He had worked all his life blue-collar modest. Most of his savings were tied up in the lake house he had bought a year before he passed, a place I had only visited twice, but that we had spoken about almost every week. "It's our someday," he used to say. I didn't know, until Mr. Dolan laid it all out, that Thomas had already transferred the deed into both our names. His handwriting was on every line, his signature beside mine. The life insurance policy split between me and his children wasn't what shocked them. It was the letter attached to it. Each of us received one. I opened mine alone at my kitchen table, the light dim, the room still. "Claire, you don't owe them explanations, but I know you'll try anyway, because that's who you are. You give even when it hurts. I left you the house not for revenge, but for peace. It's yours because you saw me. You cared for me when I couldn't care for myself. You loved me when I was hardest to love. I know they'll say I was weak manipulated, but you and I know the truth, and that's all that matters now. Take this new life and live it fully. Go sit on that porch. Watch the trees change colors, grow tomatoes, laugh. I'll be there. T." I read it twice, then 3 times. I held the paper to my lips, a silent kiss to the only person who had seen me in full color when the rest of the world painted me in shadows. Sharon's letter, I later learned through Mr. Dolan, was blistering in its honesty. Thomas didn't hold back. "You stopped coming around the day. You couldn't control me anymore," he wrote to her. "You love the version of me that followed your expectations, not the man I became. I didn't marry Claire to hurt you. I married her because she brought joy into the years you never asked about." Patrick's letter was shorter, but it ended with, "I hope someday you love someone the way I loved her, and I hope they're not judged by the people who claim to know you best." Daniel's letter was unsigned, left blank at the bottom. Perhaps Thomas ran out of time, or perhaps he'd already said enough by saying nothing. The children responded the way wounded pride often does. Sharon made a few calls to the lawyer, empty threats, vague accusations. Patrick posted a vague message online about betrayal and gold diggers. Daniel disappeared from all contact entirely, but none of them contested the will, because they couldn't. Everything had been done legally, clearly, thoughtfully. Thomas had made sure I wouldn't have to keep fighting once he was gone. And yet, as much as I had been vindicated on paper, I wasn't free from the ache. Because love isn't a courtroom victory. It's 1,000 little moments that disappear when a person does. He wasn't there to hold my hand as I sorted through his old sweaters. He wasn't there to choose which books to keep and which to donate. He wasn't there to see the spring bloom outside the lake house, just like he always dreamed. But I was there, and I was staying. I packed my things slowly, said goodbye to my little apartment by the sea, stood in the kitchen one last time with the kettle whistling, and whispered thank you to the walls that had kept me safe. Then I drove. The lake house sat nestled between tall pines, the front porch dusted with leaves. It smelled like cedar and thyme. When I stepped inside, I found a small note taped to the mirror near the front door. "Someday starts now," his handwriting again. I sat on the floor that night, surrounded by silence, and didn't feel alone. They had wanted to erase me, but Thomas had etched me into every corner of his life, in letters, in property, in promises fulfilled. And no matter how loudly they whispered their version of events, his will shouted the truth. I wasn't a mistake. I was a choice. Would you keep fighting for someone's truth, even after they're gone? The lake house sat quiet, like it had been waiting for me. Surrounded by pines and kissed by fog in the mornings, it looked like a memory frozen in time. The screen door creaked when I opened it, and dust danced in the light that filtered through the living room window. There wasn't much inside. A worn armchair, a bookshelf missing a few volumes, a simple rug with faded red patterns. The fireplace had ashes in it, long since cold. But it felt like him. It felt like home. Thomas had spoken about this place, often his escape, he called it. When everything else gets too loud, we'll come here, he'd say. No noise, no judgment. Just us. He bought it without telling anyone, not even me at first. I remember when he finally did tell me. He was sheepish, almost nervous. It's nothing fancy, he'd said, but I thought maybe it could be ours someday. And now it was. He left me no diamonds, no piles of money, no elaborate treasures to parade around. What he gave me was far rarer a sanctuary, a place to start again. There was a letter waiting for me on the kitchen counter, his handwriting again folded neatly beneath a ceramic mug I'd once admired in a thrift store. I didn't know he'd bought it. Claire, I wanted to give you something that felt like peace. Not survival, not grief. Peace. This house is for your mornings, for coffee and books and the sound of birds when no one else is listening. I hope you plant flowers. I hope you sleep in. I hope you sit on the porch and feel the quiet wrap around you like a warm blanket. I didn't get enough time with you, but I want the time we had to mean something. You saved me. You really did. Love always, T. I clutched the letter to my chest and sank into the armchair, letting the tears fall. Not from sadness, but from the gentle, aching joy of being seen. Thomas hadn't just loved me. He had understood me, understood what I needed even now, after he was gone. The kids hadn't contacted me since the reading. Not a word. I wasn't surprised. They thought I wanted wealth, but what I wanted was him. His voice in the morning, his tired laugh, the soft hum he made when he washed the dishes and didn't know I was listening. But what he left behind wasn't just property. It was his intention, his trust in me, his hope for my healing. I spent my first few days in the house, exploring slowly. There were little signs of him everywhere. A dog-eared copy of Steinbeck on the nightstand, his favorite mug on the shelf, a flannel shirt still hanging on a hook by the back door. And in a drawer in the small study, I found a collection of Polaroids, pictures of the lake in every season. Summer sun glinting on water, winter fog curling over frozen branches, a few of me, taken when I wasn't looking. I hadn't even known he was taking them. He'd been planning this in his own quiet way, while I was just trying to hold on to him for a few more weeks. He'd been imagining a future for me when mine felt like it was ending. One afternoon, I opened all the windows and swept out the dust. I lit a candle. I put on music, soft jazz, the kind he liked, and I danced in the living room with no one watching. For the first time since the funeral, I didn't feel like I was carrying grief. I felt like I was carrying him. His final gift wasn't a payout. It was permission to live, to breathe, to begin again. He knew the storm would come. He knew I'd be called names, cast out, left behind. But he also knew what would matter most in the end, the space to rebuild in peace. And he gave it to me. They thought they were punishing me by locking me out. But Thomas had already opened another door. Would you take a gift like that and stay small? Or would you step into the light and let it change you? I knew they wouldn't let it go, quietly. People like Sharon, Patrick, and Daniel don't lose control without a fight. And when you take away the narrative they've carefully built, when you show them they weren't the center of someone's world, the way they believed you, don't just hurt their pride. You humiliate their illusion. It started small. A letter from Sharon's lawyer arrived first. A formal request for a clarification of Thomas's mental state at the time of the will's signing. I sent it straight to Mr. Dolan. 2 days later, Patrick left a message on my voicemail. "You think you won, Claire, but don't forget who his real family is. You're nothing. You'll always be nothing." I sat on the floor of the lake house and played it twice, not to punish myself, but to let it sink in what I was really dealing with. They weren't mourning him. They were mourning control. Their emails came next. Sharon demanding I return a box of family heirlooms, ones I had never seen. Daniel wanting to review financial records and threatening to expose me if I didn't cooperate. They tried intimidation, guilt, legal jargon, manipulation. But they underestimated something important. I had already lived through the worst part, the silence, after his last breath. Everything after that was noise. I didn't respond. Not because I was afraid, because I refused to defend myself to people who never saw me until they saw a threat. Their fury was never about me. It was about what Thomas chose, and he hadn't chosen them. That truth was a flame they couldn't bear. They had stopped visiting him, stopped calling. They'd left him in the care of hospice nurses and excuses, and in their absence, I had stayed. But now that there was something to fight over, a deed, a legacy, a house, they suddenly cared. Not about him, about what he left behind. They called me calculated, called our marriage a scheme. Sharon even accused me of isolating him. But their version of events couldn't erase the nights I held a bowl under his chin while he coughed so hard he nearly passed out. Couldn't erase the hours I spent rubbing ointment into his bruised skin. Couldn't erase the way he whispered my name when he thought no one would hear. And they couldn't erase the paper trail, no matter how much they wanted to. Mr. Dolan assured me they had no case. Thomas had been lucid, intentional, and left behind enough documentation to fill a file cabinet. The law was on my side. But legal protection doesn't shield you from emotional venom. One day, Sharon showed up at the lake house. I saw her through the window before she knocked. Her car parked crookedly in the gravel drive, arms crossed, posture rigid, like she was preparing for battle. I opened the door slowly. "You shouldn't be here." Her eyes scanned the house, like she was measuring it. "I just want to see what he gave you, what you stole." I stood firm. "I didn't steal anything." She laughed, bitter. "You were nothing to him. Just a replacement, a placeholder. Do you really think any of this means you mattered?" I didn't answer right away. I let her words hang in the air. I wanted her to feel how little they moved me. Then I stepped aside, just slightly, letting her look past me into the house, at the small stack of books by the chair, the Polaroids, the letter framed on the mantel. "He chose me," I said finally. "Not instead of you. Just not because of you." Sharon's face broke then, not with tears, but with something more terrifying. Hurt, the real kind. The kind that came from realizing the story she'd told herself wasn't true. "Goodbye, Sharon," I said, and I closed the door. She didn't knock again. I leaned against the frame. After she left, heart thudding. My hands shook, not from fear, from the weight of standing my ground. Grief does strange things to people. It scrambles logic, turns sorrow into rage, longing into blame. But grief doesn't give you the right to rewrite someone else's love story. Thomas had made his choice, and so had they. Their absence in his final days was a decision. Their silence was a decision. Their coldness, their avoidance, their refusal to accept me, all decisions. And now they had to live with the consequences. I didn't feel triumphant. There was no satisfaction in their pain, only sadness, because I knew what they had missed, what they had turned their backs on. They could have had him. They chose pride instead. Would you open the door to someone who once slammed it in your face? Or would you finally, gently, lock it for good? There's a strange quiet to healing when no one's watching. Not the dramatic kind, the gasping sobs or thunderous confrontations, but the soft, slow work of piecing yourself back together when the world has moved on. That's what the lake house became for me. Not just a gift, not just a sanctuary, but a place to begin again. The first few weeks were slow. I barely unpacked. I left the kitchen half empty, the closets untouched. I lived among the echoes of who we were, afraid that settling in too deeply would mean letting go of Thomas. But grief is greedy. It doesn't wait for permission. It seeps into the floorboards, follows you from room to room. So instead of pushing it away, I invited it in. Every morning I made tea and sat on the porch with his journal open in my lap. Sometimes I'd read passages. Sometimes I just held it. I watched the trees shift from green to amber. I noticed the way the lake caught the early light like a mirror. There was peace in those details, a rhythm, a promise kept. It wasn't long before the neighbors started to appear curious, cautious. An older woman named Ruth waved from across the road one morning. A few days later, she knocked on my door with a tin of cookies and a gentle question. "You Thomas's wife?" I hesitated. "Yes," I said. "I was." Her face softened. "He talked about you. Said you'd be here eventually." That was the first time someone outside of Thomas and Mr. Dolan acknowledged me as his wife without suspicion, and it cracked something open in me. Ruth became a quiet friend. We exchanged books. She told me stories about her late husband, about her dog, who refused to walk on wet grass, about her bad knees, and good recipes. There was no judgment in her eyes, just understanding, the silent kind built from loss and time. I started gardening. The flower beds out front had been dry, half choked with weeds. I pulled everything out and started fresh lavender marigolds, creeping thyme. Something about planting felt right, like proof that something new could grow after so much had died. Inside the house, I rearranged slowly. Not to erase him, but to weave myself in. I kept his chair in the corner, but added a small quilt of mine over the back. I framed one of his notes and hung it in the hallway. I set our sea glass ring in a shallow dish on the windowsill where the sun could find it. There was no ceremony, no declaration, just the daily act of living. One day, I drove into town and bought paint. I chose a soft green for the bedroom. Sage the can said. Calming, hopeful. I rolled it onto the walls alone. The scent sharp in my nose, music playing low in the background. Halfway through, I sat on the bed and whispered, "I'm still here." It wasn't meant for anyone in particular. Just a simple truth, a quiet reclaiming of space. The emails from Sharon stopped. Patrick unfollowed me on social media. Daniel never reached out again. Their absence stopped feeling sharp. It dulled into something like relief. I had spent months trying to prove I belonged, and then I realized I already did. He had left this house to me, not to hurt them, not to divide his family, but to give me something stable in a world that never saw me as enough. He knew I would need somewhere to land, somewhere no one could take away. The lake house wasn't a victory. It was a bridge between who I had been and who I was becoming. I started writing again, not just in my journal, but in long letters I never sent. Letters to Thomas, to his children, even to my past self. I wrote things I hadn't said aloud. Things like, "I forgive you, and you did your best, and you deserved more than silence." Some nights, I'd light a candle and read them back to myself. Other nights, I burned them in the fireplace and watched the paper curl and vanish. Grief didn't disappear, but it stopped being a prison. It became a shadow I could walk beside. Would you find the courage to build something beautiful in the ashes of what others tried to destroy? It took me nearly 2 months to write the letters, not because I didn't know what to say, but because I wanted to be careful with how I said it. Not angry, not defensive, just honest. A final olive branch offered not out of obligation, but from a place of peace. I wrote one for each of them, Sharon, Patrick, and Daniel. Each one was different, each one a mirror, reflecting the version of their father that I knew, the version they never let themselves see. Sharon's letter was the hardest. Sharon, I know you believe I took something from you. I didn't. I gave everything I had to your father, including the parts of myself that no one else ever asked to know. He loved you. He missed you. But he also feared your judgment. And that fear kept him from telling you about our marriage until it was too late. I'm not writing to change your mind. I'm writing because he wanted you to know peace. You don't have to forgive me, but I hope you'll someday forgive him for moving on, for loving again, for not being the version of himself you wanted him to be. Patrick's letter was shorter. Patrick, your father respected your intelligence. He wanted your approval more than he ever admitted, but he stopped chasing it in the end. He told me he hoped one day you'd understand why he chose to be happy instead of obedient. He didn't leave you behind. You stepped away. And when he reached for you, you weren't there. That's not blame. That's just fact. What you do with it is yours to decide. Daniel's letter never made it into the mailbox. I wrote it, rewrote it, cried over it, and then I burned it. There was too much distance. Too many years of resentment hardened into something unmovable. I realized I wasn't writing to him. I was writing to a version of him I had never met, one that might not even exist. So I let that go. I mailed the other 2 letters. No return address, just my handwriting and a quiet prayer that maybe one day they'd open them. And then I moved on. It felt strange to walk away from a battle you didn't ask to be, in strangers still, to offer closure to people who never wanted you in the picture. But I wasn't doing it for them, not really. I was doing it for me, because I didn't want to carry their bitterness anymore, because Thomas would have wanted me to release it, because the house was too quiet to fill with ghosts. I imagined them reading those letters. Sharon, sitting at her kitchen table, rereading it in the early morning, when no one else was awake. Patrick, tossing it aside, but returning to it weeks later, when the silence in his own home grew too loud. Maybe they'd hate every word. Maybe they'd cry. Maybe they'd feel nothing. It didn't matter. I had spoken. I had told the truth. That's all I ever wanted. I started a memory box for Thomas. Nothing fancy, just a cedar box I found at a thrift store. Inside, I placed our sea glass ring, the Polaroid he took of me at the lake, the marriage certificate, one of his old handkerchiefs, and a printed copy of the letter I had written to him after the funeral. You were brave when it mattered most. You left me with more than just your name. You left me with proof that love can live quietly and still be real. I will carry you in everything I do, and I forgive you for all the things you couldn't fix. Because in the end, you gave me everything I needed: the truth, a place to rest, and the strength to go on. Sometimes we don't get to finish our stories the way we want. We don't get the perfect reconciliation, the family gathered hand in hand. Sometimes we just get the chance to tell our side. Would you take that chance even if no one ever answered back? I hadn't been back to the cemetery since the funeral. It wasn't avoidance. It was self-preservation. I wasn't ready to face the cold stone etched with his name, knowing how they had looked at me that day, like I was an intruder in the life I had shared with him most deeply. But after the letters, after the silence settled into something softer, I felt a quiet nudge in my chest. It was time. I didn't dress in black. I wore a soft gray sweater, the one he used to steal off my shoulders when he was cold, in jeans. I brought nothing but a letter folded in my coat pocket and a small bouquet of white chrysanthemums tied with a string. The cemetery was still. A gentle wind danced through the trees. Birds chirped somewhere beyond the stones. I walked slowly, each step a memory. There he was, his name carved cleanly, the date too recent to feel real. The flowers left by his children had long since withered. Only a few remained sun-bleached and brittle. I sat on the grass beside him, crossed my legs like I used to when I sat next to his recliner, my hands in his, waiting for sleep to take the pain away. For a long time I didn't speak. I just listened, to the breeze, to the ache, to the silence that felt a little less like loneliness now, and a little more like reverence. Then slowly, I pulled out the letter. My love, they didn't understand. Maybe they never will, but I'm no longer trying to make them see. I know the truth, and more importantly, you knew it too. You gave me the kind of love that didn't need noise or ceremony. Just soft mornings, quiet faith, a touch on the shoulder when the world felt too heavy. I came here to say goodbye, not to you, but to the life we didn't get to finish, to the plans we never got to make, to the porch swings, the road trips, the lazy Sunday afternoons that never came, but not to your memory, that I'll keep, always. Rest well, my husband. I've got it from here. You're Claire. I set the letter beneath the vase, weighed it down with a small stone. Then I laid the flowers at the base of the marker and traced the letters of his name with my fingers. I'm okay, I whispered. You'd be proud of me. I sat there until the shadows grew long and the wind picked up. Then I stood, brushing dirt from my knees, and turned to leave. As I reached the edge of the path, I paused, glancing back one last time. No more guilt, no more shame, no more proving, just love, just goodbye. The sun peeked through the trees as I walked back to the car. The world didn't feel quite as heavy. He was gone, but I was still here, still standing, still living. Would you say goodbye, even if the world told you that you didn't belong in the story at all? The seasons shifted slowly around me. At the lake house, time felt different. The mornings came gently, the mist curling across the water like breath. Birds called from high branches. Squirrels darted through the brush. It was quiet, but not the kind of quiet that presses in like loneliness. It was the kind that makes you feel part of something still unfolding. I no longer counted the days since he passed. Grief still moved through me. Yes, but softer now. Less like a wave, crashing, more like a tide, returning steady and familiar. It didn't steal my breath anymore. It simply reminded me of where I had been. People in town started calling me the widow from the lake. No one asked for details. Maybe they had heard rumors, maybe not. But they greeted me kindly. Ruth brought me warm bread once a week. A teenage boy offered to mow my lawn for $10 and ended up staying for cookies and a book recommendation. Life stitched itself back together in small, tender ways. One afternoon, I opened the journal again. Thomas's words, steady, elegant, unflinching, had become a kind of scripture. But I wasn't reading for comfort anymore. I was reading to remember the man who had chosen love even when it was inconvenient. The man who had walked away from expectations to build something quieter, gentler. With me, I used to think legacy was about what you left behind for others. Now I know better. Legacy is about what we choose to carry forward, and I chose to carry truth, grace, stillness, A kind of love that doesn't need an audience. Not everyone gets the ending they deserve. Some of us get to rewrite it, gently, one word at a time. I started volunteering at the library in town, helping children find books, teaching older folks how to use email. It gave my days structure, purpose, a way to give something back without telling the whole story. They didn't need to know who I had been to Thomas. They could just know me as Claire. That was enough. One day, I found a young woman sitting on the porch steps of the library, crying softly into her hands. I sat beside her without a word. Eventually, she said, "He left me." I didn't ask who. I just said, "Sometimes they don't come back, but you will." She looked at me like I had said something holy. I didn't tell her my story. I didn't need to. Sometimes survival is the most powerful story of all. Back at home, I kept a small wooden box near the window. Inside were the letters, the photos, a sprig of dried lavender from our garden, proof of the life we shared. But I didn't open it every day anymore. I didn't need to, because he was in the way I sipped my tea, in the way I looked at the sky just before dusk, in the peace I felt walking barefoot across the porch boards. This house wasn't a monument to grief. It was a testament to love, one that couldn't be taken. Not by lawyers, not by lies, not by loss. If love is real, it doesn't die with the body. It lingers. It shapes you. And if you're lucky, it frees you. Would you let love change you, even if it came wrapped in sorrow? Now that it's all told, I don't feel bitter anymore. There's no triumph in the silence that followed their absence. Just a quiet knowing I was enough. He knew it. I knew it. That's all that ever really mattered. I still walk down to the lake most mornings. The water reflects the sky in a way that always makes me pause. It's never the same color, twice, sometimes silver, sometimes blue, sometimes a soft gray, that feels like memory itself. I sit with my tea wrapped in a sweater he once wore, and I let the stillness do what it does best, heal what's left of the ache. The world moves forward. The garden blooms again. The chair by the fire creaks when I sit in it. And some nights I find myself smiling at the thought of him, his laugh, his stubbornness, his gentle eyes. I don't need the world to understand anymore. I just need peace. And here in the life I built, from ashes I have it. If you've ever been cast aside, doubted, called names, for choosing love that made you feel alive, know this: you are allowed to begin again. You are allowed to stand in the sun, even if others would keep you in shadow. You are allowed to live fully, to love gently, to let go with grace, and to carry forward only what is worth holding.